Common Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on April 21st, 2021, the committee is meeting on its study of corporate offshore licenses. Today's meeting, of course, has taken place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021, and therefore members can attend in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website, and the webcast will show only the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. You will also notice that the platform's raised hand feature on the main toolbar should you wish to speak or alert the chair. Before speaking, please click on the microphone to unmute yourself. When you are not speaking, please put your mic on mute. I would now like, of course, to welcome our witnesses for the first part of our meeting today, the first panel. We have from the Canadian Independent Fish Harvesters Federation, Melanie Sonnenberg, President. From the Fish, Food and Allied Workers Uniform, we have President Keith Sullivan. From the Maritime Fishermen's Union, we have Executive Director Martin Mellet. And from the Prince Edward Island Fishermen's Association, we have Ian McPherson, Executive Director. We will now proceed with opening remarks from Ms. Sonnenberg for 5 minutes or less. I would like to welcome Madame Desbiens in place of Madame Gill. And as well, I want to thank Mr. Bragdon for filling in as chair of the meeting last week as I wasn't available. So Ms. Sonnenberg, when you're ready for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of our members from across the country, we want to take this opportunity to address the honorable members today and again express our appreciation for this opportunity. The Canadian Independent Federation, or the Federation, is comprised of member organizations representing more than 14,000 independent owner-operator enterprises that harvest most of Canada's lobster, crab, wild salmon, shrimp, and groundfish. With 43,000 crew members across the country, independent owner-operator fleets make up the single largest private employer in most Canadian coastal communities. Combined, our harvesters spend more than 20 million hours on the water per year. Together, we produce over 5 billion meals, 3 billion in landed value, generating over 7 million throughout the value chain. Canada's fisheries brings great value to our coastal communities, and this extends far beyond solely their economic value. Fisheries connect us to our ocean and define the economic, social, and cultural fabric of our country's coastal communities. On top of this, local fisheries feeds millions of Canadians, protecting our collective food security. COVID-19 has been a reminder of the importance of protecting our domestic food supply. As the stewards of Canada's coastal communities, our members have profound concerns about the corporatization of the fishery, particularly by vertically integrated and multinational corporations, and especially from foreign countries. We thank the committee for its attention to this critically important issue. The simple message is this: our public resources are at risk of being swallowed up by foreign owners who are driven by one thing and one thing only: securing our wild fisheries production for their profit. Access to the fishery by these vertically integrated and foreign multinationals threatens our coastal communities whose livelihoods depend on the economic vibrancy of the fishery. Take, for example, Royal Greenland, a fishing company wholly owned by the government of Greenland, Denmark. Royal Greenland's operations in Canada illustrate the severity of the threats posed by corporatization of the fishery. Keith Sullivan will speak to this as well, I'm sure, but this is a really good case in point. Royal Greenland has 9 production units in Canada. They do not support the owner-operator fishery as they explicitly promote full vertical integration, a business model not permitted in the Canadian inshore fishery. Royal Greenland bought into the Newfoundland and Labrador fishery in 2016. By 2020, the year after, their shareholders made record profits of over 52 million Canadian. They were the largest processor in the province. They recently purchased the second and fourth largest processing companies in the province and continue to secure considerable financial stakes in the province in several smaller companies. Royal Greenland's arrival to Newfoundland drastically accelerated the pace of foreign corporate consolidation, and they now have significantly more capital than any other local processing company. This aggressive business model of control and purchase completely stifles local competition. Royal Greenland also operates a plant in Quebec. Their plant in Matam produces 45 tons per day of prawns and snow crab, only 5% of which stays in Canada. The remainder goes to Europe, and in 2019 and 2021, Royal Greenland's Matam plant offered extremely high landing prices to snow crab fishermen in order to cut supply to local Quebec and New Brunswick-owned plants. Not only is Royal Greenland swallowing up local processors and producers, but their shareholders are also reaping all the benefits from our fisheries, leaving only a small fraction of their food supply and economic value for Canadians. The corporatization of the fishery has several far-reaching, long-term consequences. It puts at risk our collective food security, increases prices to the end Canadian consumer, takes corporate profits out of local communities and puts them in the hands of corporate shareholders, jeopardizes the future of independent, locally owned factories, which can prevent independent fish harvesters from negotiating a fair landing price. And finally, it undermines the principle of owner-operator, which is the backbone of Canada's coastal communities. Our coastal communities have the potential to be resilient, sustainable, and prosperous drivers of coastal economic and cultural wealth for generations to come. We must do everything we can to protect this public resource, which critically also ensures that we are never cut off from our own domestic food supply. Fisheries access must remain in the hands of our harvesters and our coastal communities, and our fishing licenses must only be for the participation granted. The Federation supports a competitive market environment, but we must ensure that the control of these precious public resources remains in Canadian hands for generations to come. We need to ensure fair and equitable opportunities for our future generation of fish harvesters, the new entrants in the industry. As such, we support the collaborative development of clear regulations to limit foreign ownership and corporate control of our fisheries. This could include reducing the threshold for foreign acquisitions under Investment Canada Act and the implementation of regulations requiring transparency of corporate agreements signed with respect to fishing licenses. We will forward a more expanded written response with some case studies for your review, as we've got such a short time and we want to be able to use it for questions, Mr. Chair. So I'll close with saying that we're, again, appreciative of the opportunity and we're looking forward to answering any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sonnenberg. We'll now go to Mr. Sullivan for 5 minutes or less, please.
Okay, hope you're hearing me well. Thanks very much for the opportunity on behalf of our 13,000 members here in what, at least today, is sunny and warm Newfoundland. Not sure for all the province, but the fish, food and allied workers, we represent all inshore harvesters in the province, 3,000 owner-operator enterprises and their crew members as well. Our scope of membership also includes those in the processing sector. In Newfoundland and Labrador, the value of the inshore fishery cannot be understated. It's closely connected to our culture and continues to support our coastal communities. Throughout our history, hard-working men and women have devoted their lives to the ocean around us, and the dedication has been the backbone of our province. Today, our collective success depends on keeping the value of this industry in their capable hands. So year after year, we witness the increased concentration of provincial processing sector, and our members have continued to raise concerns about the corporatization of the fishery, particularly by multinational corporations owned by other countries. And so thank you for paying attention to such an important issue for us. It is significant to note that this high degree of corporate concentration in the fish processing sector in the province has not been a positive development. It has depressed competition for prices at the wharf, stifled the ability of harvesters to seek new buyers, and really swung labour relations environment in the direction of the processing companies without the transparency we need. These negative impacts are only exacerbated when corporate control is in the hands of foreign entities. The foreign-owned Crown Corporation has become the largest processing company in Newfoundland and Labrador. It has taken over two major companies, other small companies. Royal Greenland is owned, as Melanie said, by the government of Greenland. The company is beholden to the people of Greenland and Denmark and is able to access unprecedented capital to further expand into any market. As a government-owned company, Royal Greenland has certain social responsibilities and accountabilities to Greenland that it doesn't have in Newfoundland and Labrador or Canada. This creates conflict whereby Royal Greenland prioritizes Greenlandic harvesters and employees over the best interest of harvesters and employees right here. We saw this in shrimp in 2020 when they wouldn't buy shrimp in Newfoundland and Labrador, but bought large amounts in Greenland. The success of Royal Greenland depends upon vertical integration between fishing fleets and the processing side of the seafood industry. They really have to circumvent the rules here in Canada, federal regulations, and Royal Greenland has created its own form of vertical integration through these controlling agreements. So when the purchase of a large processing company in the province was announced late 2015, Royal Greenland stated, if we want to invest in developing existing markets, that we consolidate and cooperate within our core species. The intention was to dilute competition among processing companies and instead focus on other proteins, competition with other proteins. This perspective is incredibly harmful to independent fish harvesters who rely on fair competition to get fair and reasonable prices. So without the ability to access competitive pricing, harvesters are bound to financial relationships, sometimes with processors that don't serve them. So Royal Greenland seeks consolidation and cooperation across national borders, and this is not to the benefit of workers, of harvesters, and is really against policies that limit this foreign ownership. We cannot allow one of our most valuable public resources, one with incredible socioeconomic value and quite literally puts food on our table, to be sold to the highest international bidder. To do so, is a mental miscalculation that will be suffered by generations. Continued access to our resources by foreign multinationals threatens our coastal communities that have been the stewards of our seas for generations. The survival of our coastal communities, which we proudly showcase as synonymous with Newfoundland and Labrador, relies on the protection of adjacent marine resources that provide meaningful employment and quality of life. The recent changes to the Fisheries Act, included in the purpose section, the preservation or promotion of the independence of license holders in commercial inshore fisheries. We recommend this committee propose tangible supports to follow up on this purpose. There are several ways to do this, such as limiting corporate concentration with a special emphasis on foreign interests, ensuring an aggressive crackdown on illegal controlling agreements where corporate interests siphon the value of adjacent resources from our communities, and focusing on supporting new owner-operator harvesters in this sector. So it's incumbent on every member here and all who value our oceans to protect the public resource and ensure it is the people of Canada who enjoy the economic and societal benefits that come from our waters. I know I'm up against my time limit, so I'll be happy to have a conversation more and answer questions further. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. We'll now go to Mr. Millay from the Maritime Fishermen's Union, please, for 5 minutes or less.
Mr. Chair, can you guys hear me? Mr. Chair,
it's not coming through very loud, Martin.
How about this?
Yeah.
This is better? Okay. I had an issue with my Mac a little earlier. So, okay, well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and the committee for having, on behalf of the Maritime Fishermen's Union, for giving us the opportunity to speak today. Our organization represents over 1,300 independent inshore owner-operator fishermen in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. Grateful that all parties supported changes in the Fisheries Act that protected owner-operators and fleet separation and legislation, with the purpose of keeping Atlantic Canada's public resources in the hands of fishers in their communities and protecting the inshore fisheries from corporate control and influence. However, we are still very much at risk from losing our fisheries from other angles. In recent years, mom and pops, family-run and community-based fishing and processing enterprises have been on the international menu to be bought and agglomerated by large corporate interests owned by foreign nationals.
Mr. Malay, I'm getting some notice from the interpreters that they're having a problem with the sound. So, Tina, could you advise us on that, please?
Monsieur Mallet, if you don't mind,
yes.
Can we ask you to select your headset? At the bottom of your screen, you'll see settings for audio.
Yep, it's selected. Is this better?
Looks like there might be a problem with your headset.
Maybe I can try using the internal speaker on the computer, but it might take me a few moments. Maybe a suggestion would be to pass it on to the next speaker.
Okay, that's what we'll do, and we'll ask IT to get in touch with you and see if we can straighten out that issue. So we'll jump ahead now to Mr. McPherson for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, committee members. And once again, the Prince Edward Island Fishermen's Association appreciates the opportunity to present to the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans during this busy time for all. As a representative organization for over 1,260 captains, our harvesters have experienced many changes in the past few years related to onboard equipment, regulations, and export markets. But the fact that our members participate in a profession that contributes directly to their local economy does not. Fishing has been a cornerstone of local coastal economies for many years, and if we play our cards right, it will be for many more. But there are storm clouds on the horizon that are cause for concern. We should all be concerned about the risk of moving from having independent owner-operators supporting our local communities to a consolidation of the industry around big corporations that have too much control over the fishery and who may export significant profits. The concept of independent owner-operators managing their own businesses has been a key concept for the survival of coastal communities since the start of the commercial fishery. Captains and crews that live in these communities buy their food, pickup trucks, and supplies locally so that local businesses can continue to survive. On PEI, most fleets employ 3 to 4 crew members with the 1,260 core licensed fleets. This represents wages for between 3,700 to 5,000 individuals and their families on the harvester side alone. This example is how our independent small business contribute to and impact local economies. Our sector was one of the few industries that started last spring and generated much needed jobs and business revenue for Canada when most of the country and world was shutting down due to the COVID-19 virus. But much of what I've outlined is at risk if we allow corporate interests to gain control and have power over the fishery. The recent sale of Clearwater Seafood of Nova Scotia to Premium Brands of Vancouver and FNC Holdings Limited Partnership is of great concern. The issue is about the consolidation of power and corporate interests in the fishery, regardless of who owns the corporation. There are many unanswered questions surrounding this deal that need to be answered by the federal government. The largest corporate sale in Canadian seafood history was announced on November 9, 2020, and approved less than 60 days later on January 6, 2021, with much of the review time taking place over the traditional holiday season. As December 23rd letter expressing concerns and questions by the PIFA to Minister Freeland was not replied to until May 7th, 2021. Here are some of the key questions and concerns we have. It is unclear why the transfer of the existing grandfathered mid and offshore licenses are being transferred to one part of the ownership group. Since the conclusion of the sale, number 2, the new entity has purchased more assets in the seafood and cold storage sectors, which speaks to a target model of full vertical integration. This model typically lessens competition on the wharf. Number 3, if either the new entity or one of the shareholder groups becomes insolvent or bankrupt, will Section 15 of the DFO licensing policy, licenses held by a corporation and receivership, still apply? And number 4, will the existing shore and offshore licenses be granted any additional provisions? We are still awaiting a reply from the Department of Finance Canada on what tax changes may occur under the new ownership group. The issuing of licenses to mid and offshore fleets has always been contentious, as it is the focus is first and foremost is shareholder return. Our ocean resources are collectively owned for the benefit of all Canadians. Our concern is that there may be unintended consequences to all harvesters and their communities if the requested license transfer proceeds without full disclosure, transparency, and preferential corporate access to Canadian resources permitted. At the very least, all potential negative impacts need to be assessed. Food security for all Canadians is of primary importance. Transactions of this magnitude must be scrutinized in their entirety and all impacts, positive or negative, assessed. We believe independent local owner-operators, whether they be Indigenous or non-Indigenous fishers, not big corporations, is the best way to keep the fishery and our communities strong and sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McPherson. Now I'd like to go back to Mr. Millay if the sound issue has been rectified. So you can start off from the beginning if you like.
Can you guys hear me? Can the translation hear me speak?
No. Wait,
no.
1 second. They're still checking on us.
Testing 1, 2. Hello.
Mr. Chair, could we suspend for 2 moments, please?
Yes, no problem. We'll suspend for a moment. Tina, you let us know when we're good to start again. Thank you. So, Mr. Bragdon, we'll go to you first for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good to have you back. And we'll get underway with our questions this evening. And thank you to all the witnesses. Good to see you here today, sharing your thoughtful considerations, and appreciate the input you're providing to this committee. Royal Greenland's growth in the Canadian fishing sector has been cited as an example of the growing trend of foreign ownership in Canada's shared fisheries resources. We also know that the principles of owner-operator and fleet separation
have been established in Canada's Fisheries Act. Question number one is, how are multinationals able to grow and consolidate the power that they do have in Canadian fisheries, even though owner-operator and fleet separation have been established in the Fisheries Act? So I'll put that out to each of you. I'll start with you, Ms. Sonnenberg.
The issue around the access through controlling agreements, given that the regulation came into play April 1st, we've had a policy in the fishery which prohibited this from happening. But because it was a policy as opposed to law, we had a considerable amount of creep, we'll call it. And so now we've moved into a different phase where the implementation is starting, and hopefully we will see the department do more investigative work and be more attentive from a regulatory standpoint to expose some of these things that are going on behind the scenes. So with the legislation and the regulation, we're very hopeful in the industry that some of this will come to an end, but without support of all parties, we need them to be on this as well. It's not a matter of just hoping for the best and wait and see what happens. We need to make sure that everybody understands the importance of protecting our coastal communities in this country and ensuring that these licenses stay in the hands of the individuals in the communities.
I have to interrupt because you're coming through, but it's a lot of static and interruption in the answers you're giving. And the translators, again, aren't able to actually translate it. So I don't know if it's related to your headset or the placement of your headset, but we'll go to Mr. Bragdon for some more questions, and hopefully somebody can check on that for you.
Thank you, Ms. Sonnenberg, and thank you, Mr. Chair. To each of you, and you may want to comment on the original question, but all parties supported the addition of fleet separation and owner-operator to the Fisheries Act when Bill C-68 was before the committee in the 42nd Parliament. Did Bill C-68 properly establish these principles in the Fisheries Act, in your opinion? So I'll maybe start with you, Mr. Sullivan, and then Mr. McPherson, and back to Ms. Sonnenberg after that. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Hope you're hearing me fine. Thank you. Yeah, so I would say, first of all, for foreign companies to get access into the processing sector, very few limitations, and I think that's a part of the consideration here. Do we want foreign governments controlling that much of our food security and be able to come right into the fisheries and certainly have that much level of power and control? So the second part, and Melanie was about talking about the ease of which these companies have just flaunted the owner-operator policy and the fleet separation. So for some time, we know there's been court cases around this. I think of the Elson case with Quinlan Brothers in Newfoundland and Labrador. They were able to control these inshore licenses. And right now, when we go out to our communities on the wharves and everything, it doesn't look like anything has changed. We are hopeful that the changes in the Fisheries Act and the regulations will give us the teeth where the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Canadian government, will be able to dig into these controlling agreements that are, really undermining our coastal economy. Up to this point, it came into effect, the regulations, April 1st. We have not seen the evidence of this, but I really suggest this is where we need to put our focus. We've seen it slip way too much, so much so where people in the fish processing companies are just buying all these up, and the value of the fish on our doorstep can go to foreign shareholders, and that's not the vision we had for the Fisheries Act. So I think we really need to focus on cracking down on those controlling agreements.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. And Mr. McPherson?
Yeah, I think the thing that I wanted to touch upon was, and we're working with DFO, and a lot of the folks in DFO did an excellent job on the legislation and putting the regulations in place or drafting them. But there are some areas that we have some concerns on, and I'd loop it back to the financing part, where typically before the changes were made, it was only chartered banks or credit unions that could make these types of financial loans. That was probably too restrictive, excluded family members and things like that. It could have been in contravention if they helped. But on the other hand, we really have to make sure that that it doesn't get opened up too much, and that we have offshore companies helping financing licenses and the purchase of fleets, because that was the very point that we advocated for these changes. So we have to be very diligent, not just fishing groups, but our political representatives, to make sure we don't slide back down that slope. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bragdon. Your time is up. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. And it's too bad we lost Martin for this part, because we have to be clear, and let's clarify for the sake of the analysts that are doing this. There's two issues here. We're interchanging, and I ask for a clarification. We're interchanging corporate within the inshore and the offshore. The offshore, access to offshore resources are exclusively held within corporations. The inshore fishery, as enshrined in the owner-operator policy, is exclusively for inshore fisheries. Some of them hold affairs for tax purposes within corporate identities, but since they are a bona fide fisher, this is allowed. So on the issue here, could you clarify for me, Ian, and Melanie can come in as well, is what is the issue you see that may infringe on the owner-operator policy, or could, when corporate access to offshore resources are sold, and especially if they're sold to foreign interests? Ian or Melanie?
Melanie, why don't you take that one first? Yeah.
Thank you, my esteemed colleague from Prince Edward Island. I think that, Mr. Morrissey, I think the issue is, yes, offshore. And before I go any further, I need to see if the interpreter can hear me properly. It's so-so. Okay, I'll just keep my eye on everybody, and if it's not good, you can cut me off and we'll let Mr. McPherson finish the answer. There is a blurring of the lines, Mr. Morrissey, between offshore and inshore. I think that might be one of our primary issues. I'm looking.
Well, your sound is bad, but when you say a blurring, because that's what is important for this committee to get clear. What is the area that government must be on guard to protect the blurring from offshore? Because offshore has always been corporately controlled. But what triggered some discussion is the sale of a large corporation that had access to resources that are resources of the state, and how that may encroach on the inshore fishery. Because, and also there was discussion on the ownership of processors, but really this committee has no great control over who buys independent processing companies. Recognize these are all licensed by provincial government. The processing sector is licensed by provincial governments, not the government of Canada. So I want to focus my question on the concern that the inshore fishers has as it relates to the sale of corporations that have access to offshore resources through licenses or through a quota allocation.
I'll try again really slowly, and then if it doesn't work, I'll turn it to Ian. Again, back to the blurring of the lines. It starts out offshore, but there is oftentimes doors where people are coming in through controlling agreements, where they're gaining access to the inshore to get more supply. And I think that is the preoccupation of the industry, is the fact that things are not very transparent, and it's very difficult to see things for us up front. And so that constant, and in the case of Royal Greenland, yes, they are a processing industry that have come to Newfoundland, but with that, they've also gained, and this is on the inshore, gained access through controlling agreements. We have other other situations and companies that may be able to and may have access in British Columbia, have access to the inshore. And the situation in British Columbia is quite different from the East. They have a lot of corporations owning and running things in the fishery, as you know from your study. And that is shown us in the East how dangerous and what a slippery slope it is in terms of getting control and how fast it happens because of the deep pockets. And I'll stop it there and let Ian add to it.
Yeah, I guess the other part of that, and I think Keith alluded to it earlier in terms of, I think every harvester wants healthy competition on the wharf. If it's too minimal, that's not a healthy situation. Everybody in the supply chain has to make money. But I think when you've got a scenario where a company that's seeking a resource and they may have an offshore license and coming into the inshore and perhaps overpaying what the market can support, usually there's a price to be paid. Sometimes it won't be that year, but it'll certainly be a year after.
So just could I interject
several years
there,
after.
Ian, could I just, because I'm running out of time. So the concern primarily from inshore fishers rests at who owns the processing level and the concentration at the processing side, not so much who has the corporate control of the offshore resource. Ian?
Yeah, can you repeat that again, Bobby, please? Sorry.
I think, Chair, I'm running out of time, did I?
Have a few seconds, Bobby.
Okay. Simply, is the concern amongst inshore fishers the corporate ownership at the processing level versus the corporate control at the fishing level, regardless if it's offshore? Your primary concern is the corporate ownership at the processing side, not on the harvesting side. Is that where you're coming from?
Well, I'd say that it would be equal on both sides, because it impacts there's two sides to the industry, and if there's unhealthy balance in one side or the other, it's going to have negative impacts. That's an interesting question, and I would have to think on that a little bit more. Melanie, if you got or Keith, a quick response there.
Chair, we can follow it up with later questions. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Bobby, because time was gone over. I did allow a little extra because of the interruptions. We'll now go to Madame Desbiens for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's very interesting to hear you. Thank you to the witnesses for your presentations. That helps us out. I'm an island dweller myself, so I'm very interested in the activities on PEI. My father was in the boating and when you talk about offshore, you say that they're ruining the ecosystem and that they're going to be taking away a huge quantity of fish that we need for the balance of equity, and that's a problem. It's the same thing on the Madeleine Islands as on PEI. So can you, Mr. McPherson, can you tell us a little bit more about this problem?
Is that that they're driven for profit, and that the resource is for offshore sale, and we need healthy balance. I guess I want to reiterate that the inshore sector is not adverse to corporations. It's just that with the rapidity and the scope of these takeovers and buy-ups of small operations, and Martin's was going to highlight another situation in Canada. It's fairly problematic. Of course, we all look to DFO to work hard and manage the resource so that no one takes advantage of it or takes advantage of it too much. So these are challenges. I think what we're talking about is checks and balances that are need to be discussed and talked about more openly. Thank you.
Merci, c'est très intéressant.
Thank you. That's very interesting. In Quebec, we have thought about the blue economy. That's what we're betting on, so that we'd be self-sufficient, and that it would be really the community that would have the priority in the economy, rather than the international extension of the economy that may look like it pays more, but in fact it can be catastrophic in terms of taking all the fish resources. So are you worried about losing the resource itself?
Well, we're always worried about the resource. I think what happens is that if a company comes in and overpays, and it could be for several years, if the long game is to take control of a market or gain a large market share, and then that starts to reduce the competition on the wharf because the boats get lost to the bidder that's paying significantly more, and it's really not a productive way for our system to work here. We need those checks and balances.
Donc, la vitalité.
So the economic vitality of your sector is threatened under these circumstances with too much fishing.
Well, again, we leave it up to DFO to make sure that people companies are following the rules, not just inshore, but midshore and offshore. And, that as organizations, we're always watching that. Certainly some of the offshore fleets that, some of the stocks, mackerel, for example, we have big concerns that, too many of the big fleets are taking the majority of the resource out. But these are things that we deal with on a daily basis as organizations, and that's what we're here for, to advocate.
Est-ce que j'ai encore du temps, Monsieur le Président?
Do I still have time, Mr. Chair?
Alors,
So I would like to speak to Madame Sonnenberg, despite her sound difficulties. I was talking about the resources, the fish resources. Do you think there's an imminent danger of a lack of resources there for the small operators?
Generally, I would say that given the way that the fishery is managed through the department, there are some stocks that have serious issues, and Ian referenced mackerel as an example. So yes, there are certainly areas where we would have concerns, but I think more importantly, it's back to transparency so that we can understand in the corporate offshore, if that's what we're talking about, that we can better understand the fishing plans and what's going on, and there's an integration. But I would maybe, to go back to one of Bobby's questions, and it ties into this, is the fishery is a Canadian resource, and it must be managed for Canadians, by Canadians, and operated by Canadians. It's not a resource that we want to see given over to other countries, other foreign interests. It's very, very important as we work through our management plans to secure our supply in a responsible and sustainable way. And I agree with you about the blue economy. It has great potential for a more stable approach to generating income and wealth for our coastal communities. But it has to be done in a way that we can see it, it has to be enforced, and we have to ensure that the benefits come back into the hands of Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the time we have for that line of questioning. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for your testimony. Ms. Sonnenberg, you talked about the West Coast and foreign ownership and the slippery slope that the East Coast could be headed in or is headed in. And it's pretty alarming when you tell me, both Mr. Sullivan and yourself shared about Royal Greenland and purchasing the second and fourth largest processing companies on the East Coast. Now, I guess some of the questions I have, in terms of operational structure and corporate structure, can you talk about some of the concerns around the loopholes, if you want to call it, or how they're circumnavigating appropriate reviews by Industry Canada, buying into the Canadian market, and what safeguards need to be in place? Ms. Sonnenberg, I'll start with you, maybe there.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. The thresholds at when corporations come to purchase fish plants and access and so on, it's a high bar. The numbers are, for a country, I believe $480 million catches the attention of Industry Canada, or it's in that range. And a corporation coming in at 1.2 million catches their attention. Sometimes what happens in coastal communities, and perhaps if Mr. Millay had been able to be on, we've seen in New Brunswick where smaller plants are, I won't say gobbled up, but being purchased and being done in a very systematic way. So at the end of the day, we now have a conglomeration owned by one entity, which could make those, perhaps if they continue on, could make the threshold. So these things are what is concerning, is it's not making the radar, and that is a problem in itself. On the West Coast, and you know this probably better than I, there is a lot of foreign ownership, and it's not clearly understood. The committee raised it in the report in 2019, I believe, as a recommendation to have some public registry. We need to understand who is owning our resource on the West Coast, and we continue to advocate for that recommendation. And again, it's a public resource for our country.
Ms. Sonnenberg, you're
elsewhere. I'm breaking up.
Yeah, you're breaking up big time. I don't know if Mr. Sullivan has anything to add to the answer to that question.
Well, and I'll just add to that, Mr. Sullivan, can you maybe talk, just also share, the frustration on the West Coast is there is no public registry. These recommendations came a couple of years ago, and there's been no action around foreign ownership on the West Coast, transfers there, no public registry. Why would the government not provide this information?
I've heard the frustration from colleagues in British Columbia as well. A lot of the processing sector, that side, corporate side, is foreign owned, and we had examples this year where American companies were just taking the raw material and shipping it out. Even on the corporate, offshore fishery here, it's frustrating because inshore adjacent harvesters have so little of the fish. A little bit different here. The offshore actually has the majority of the fish on the Grand Banks. Between foreign entities own probably the most, then a Canadian offshore sector, which really just blew up in the 60s and 70s, a short period of time in our overall history. And just inshore fishermen who depended on the local stocks for years have minimal access. So they have the least amount of access to the fish off the Grand Banks. The fish that comes from the offshore sector, most of that is shipped out. So you want to get in there with something?
Well, I think I'm going to go to the next question. It's around Royal Greenland again. These controlling agreements. Can you talk about how the impact that has on coastal communities and these fishers, and how they can control the price? And also, maybe you can speak to: do other countries allow foreign ownership where they can come in and take over a public resource like this and circumnavigate the rules and dominate, like what we're seeing right here? I can't imagine. Or any other country.
Yeah, I can't think of any country with their fisheries that has a structure like this. And I guess the thing is, on paper, in some ways, Canada doesn't have this foreign ownership, but we know majorities of some fishing fleets are illegally owned by fish processing companies. I mean, it's obvious in every community. We can go around communities in Newfoundland and Labrador. That's a company boat. There seems to be a real hesitation on the Department of Fisheries and Oceans part to do anything about it. But again, we do have regulations, and we do hope there's more investment in this and following up with investigations at exactly where the money is, what are the agreements that lawyers have drawn up that says it's in a fisherman's name, but we know all the value of that fish is going to a processing company. We really need to dig in and crack down on that. It's been known for some time, but the will wasn't to everyone knowing that it is really doing, parts of the coastal economy depending on the fishery. That money is just leaving there now. A lot of value in the fishery. And if you're a young person, you don't have a chance of getting in because there's going to be a company outbid you every single time. So that's what's happened in the last number of years.
Thank you, Mr. Jans. We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please. And I will say to Ms. Sonnenberg, if anybody has a question to Ms. Sonnenberg, probably you might want to send her the question and she can respond in writing back to the clerk, so as we'd be able to have the answer more suitably available when we start to clue this up. So it'd be great if we could cooperate there. So Mr. Arnold, for you for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all of the witnesses. My question is for Ms. Sonnenberg, so she may be able to give a thumbs up or a short answer to the question and still be able to be heard. As you're aware, the committee undertook a study in the last Parliament that examined DFO regulations of fisheries in British Columbia, or the West Coast. Recommendation 6 of that report called on the government to undertake a comparative analysis of the East Coast and West Coast fisheries. Last June, Minister Jordan tabled the government response in which she stated the government had initiated the analysis that was asked for in Recommendation 6. Do you know if the report of that comparative analysis has been completed or not?
I don't know if anybody can hear me. We're having a terrible storm here, and I did not hear the question.
No, and we're not hearing the answer either, Ms. Sonnenberg. So, Mr. Arnold, if you'd submit that maybe to the clerk in writing, and they'll contact Ms. Sonnenberg with it. So go ahead, sir.
Okay, and if that report has been completed, has it been shared with anybody outside of DFO or the government? Would be interesting to see that report. So I want to move on to hopefully someone that we can have a better connection with. I'm sorry yours isn't working, Ms. Sonnenberg. Despite C-68's efforts, the changes to the Fisheries Act in the last Parliament, the efforts to strengthen the principles, do you think that the current wording and applications are strong enough to achieve the intended outcomes of protecting fisheries and harvesters? I'll start, I guess, with you, Mr. McPherson, if you could.
As I said earlier, we are still working closely with DFO to. There were a couple of areas that we were still talking about when it went to second reading, and then the final language came out. So I would say it's still a work in progress. Anytime that, as everyone on this committee knows, the fisheries escalated in value quite a bit over the last few years. And so we always have to be diligent to make sure that the current regulations are enforced to the letter of the law, and that any areas that we can shore up with perhaps some more policy information. So
thank you. Mr. Sullivan?
I think the wording is probably fine. I mean, I really find that is just the backing up with the actions, the real commitment to follow up on these major problems that are undermining our rural economy, our coastal communities, places that depend on the fishery. So it's all about the intent of it and following up on that intent. That seems to be the piece that's really missing in the equation. I don't think it's necessarily a major weakness of the wording and regulations. We just need to dig in and do this and make sure people who are breaking those rules are paying the penalties for it, and there's enough a disincentive there for people not to be doing it. Right now, there hasn't been a consequence for people breaking the rules all along. That's where I see the biggest issue.
Thank you. More than the actual language that's out there. Thank you. Mr. McPherson, and possibly if there's others that have something to add in afterwards, you mentioned the unintended consequences of some of these controlling agreements that are taking place. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Without our time is very limited. So what are the unintended consequences that you see?
Well, certainly that the difficulty of newer, younger people getting into the fishery. A lot of times, the sale of a fleet can be dictated by the person or company that's financing that fleet in the back scene there. That's one of the biggest ones, and as I alluded to earlier, we want to make sure that there's always healthy competition out there on the wharf, and that certainly corporations have their place, but it's important that the small independent businesses are able to survive too, and that's one of our big concerns right now.
Okay, thank you. And if Ms. Sonnenberg and Mr. Sullivan might be able to answer in writing to the committee, because I know I think I'm out of time, am I not, Mr. Chair? Thank you.
Right on the mark, Mr. Arnold. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses for being here today. Just want to go back. I'm not sure if Ms. Sonnenberg is back on, but I'll start with Mr. Sullivan. Just going back to Royal Greenland, we saw that with shrimp a couple of years ago, but I'm seeing it right now with lobster and crab this year in my riding of this company being on the wharf and offering like $2, $3, $4 a pound more for some of the resources. When you are a fisherman, you're offered some of those kind of price. You tend to, sell to the person who was offering you more, right? But on your hand, are you also telling your fishermen what can be the impact of that? Because we all know that, after they offer those price, maybe in the next couple of years, they will just say, hey, we buy everything here, and now the price is, at the lower as possible. So, and what do you think also we can do as a government to stop that? Because it's very, very troubling to me that is happening. And I raised that a couple of times, and I think our government is prepared to look at it. So what do you think is the solution here?
Well, first of all, you're right. I mean, that's hard to argue that's.
Good afternoon, Mel here.
Oh, hello. Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's when you see these big prices or something being offered, obviously that's what's the problem here. That's sometimes it can be a sign of some healthy competition, but it's we know they're aggressively trying to eliminate the competition. So as Mr. Morrissey had mentioned before, it is complicated because the processing is provincial. So we're talking provincial counterparts about having too much concentration and eliminating the competition, but also those who are processing are usually the offshore fishing companies as well. We see Ocean Choice International, big fish processing, big offshore operator. Clearwater, we would see some of the similar things there. So that level of concentration, I think that has to be looked at, and why we're here talking about the offshore sector, the concentration in the offshore sector. So it's usually directly related to the processing sector. So I think that's where this committee can really have an impact.
Okay, so now just on another topic, I think you saw in the news lately that there was a lot of crab licenses from my area in northern New Brunswick that are being sold and left the region. Those licenses were 10, 12, 15 million now. Most of that because of ruling that you only have to be resident of New Brunswick for 6 months, for example. A couple of years ago, I think Mr. McPherson is on a line from PEI, was a license bought from a 24-year-old from PEI. DFO said they, checked everything. Everything was according to the law, blah, 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 blah. Do you think there's enough done by DFO official to monitor those kind of transactions? Because we're seeing that in crab right now with those licenses worth, millions of dollars. But in lobster now, licenses can be worth here close to $1.5 million. So do you think there's enough done, Ms. Sonnenberg or Mr. McPherson, about the monitoring of DFO official? And do you think we need some changes if those residency rule or other rules? And do you think a committee should be maybe put in place to go at the bottom of this and make sure that those licenses stay within the community? Because the new Fisheries Act, the regulation that we put in place, the owner operator and the fleet separation, the spirit of it is to keep those licenses within the community, right? So if we have all those licenses leaving, what are we going to do, right? We're talking about Royal Greenland here, but I'm bet that we can talk about Champlain Investment. We can talk about other also group of company that wants to buy that. So do you think we have some work to be done here by the DFO official and by our government, and I'm sure that wants to look at it, and maybe a committee put in place? Ms. Sonnenberg or Mr. McPherson, whoever want to go first.
I certainly think that would be a good start. What we want to be careful of is saying every situation's bad, because it's not. But at the other end, there are areas of concern, and it really needs to be followed up. And this is one of the primary areas we're working with DFO on the enforcement side to make sure that they go through enough steps to identify the money. One other quick comment I wanted to make, let's not forget we're talking about food. And when you've got organizations that are backed by countries that they for food, they're going to pay a lot of money to get a control of those resources. Yeah. Let's not lose sight of that. Thank you.
Good. Ms. Sonnenberg, maybe.
Thank you, Mr. Cormier. And I think you'll remember I stated that any questions from Ms. Sonnenberg, we'll put them in writing to the clerk. The clerk will get them to her and she can respond in the same way, instead of having static and having to interrupt and waste more time. We'll now go to Madame Desbiens for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is so interesting. I'd like to be sitting on this committee. It makes me hungry. Mr. Sullivan, we have thought a lot, and I've been taking notes. There's the question of transparency, which is important for the community, the question of the economy for the community, and of that market for the resource, and that market has to be maintained. So what would your proposals be? A question of vigilance. Are there any ways to do better surveillance of how things are unfolding?
Short answer is yes. I think it just is a matter of some more resources here, because, and it's not, this fishery, the inshore fishery, can operate very well on its own. It's a very healthy environment. Young people can get in and pay fair market value, can get a fair return on investment. It's just that, the proposition for fish companies to go in there and get access to the supply, it's a little bit of a different value proposition, and that's all leaving. So we really just need the DFO to follow up on what they say they're going to do, the investigations, and really, when they find these people who are involved, sometimes there's significant licenses and there can be penalties associated with this. What we've seen in the past, when they were outside the regulation and basically in violation of the owner-operator and these fleet separation policy, was given a chance to fix it, or because the policy was there just to, we wanted people to come in compliance. That wasn't what it was supposed to be in the past. DFO got very lenient and were very sympathetic, I think, to some of the larger companies. And but now we need them to really dig in, and there has to be consequences. I think that's the biggest thing we see. If people are fined or lose access to licenses that are worth millions of dollars, soon that'll become too risky of a proposition for any company. And just make sure that we're doing what we can to keep those licenses in generally the local areas with harvesters in those communities.
Thank you, Ms. Desbiens. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you. I think we've seen, this comparative analysis, and I think that DFO clearly needs to get a backbone when it comes to protecting harvesters from foreign ownership. Maybe you can speak. Well, actually, in BC, we've saw U.S.-based Pacific Group. They brought up a bunch of processing and fishing licenses, and then they basically shut down the processing and exports, live or fresh or frozen, for processing in the U.S. And now they actually get half of what they used to get, and half of what U.S. fishermen get for the same product. Can you talk about how this could happen on the East Coast in terms of the purchases that are happening, and what does DFO need to do to stop foreign ownership and the impact that's having on independent fish harvesters? And I'll leave it with you both, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. McPherson. You both take a stab at this.
Sure, maybe Keith, if I'll go first. I just wanted to loop back to a point that Melanie made earlier, and I believe she said 1.2 million, but meant to say 1.2 billion is the threshold before the purchase of some of these, the full breadth of the federal government analysis. We need to lower that threshold, because you can buy a lot of operations that are 2 or 5 or 10 or 20 million and still be under that threshold. So that's a real problem.
Also, Mr. McPherson, can you also speak about how they're even able to circumnavigate that? Because they're buying chunks at a time.
Yes, so and currently they would be in compliance. So that's the concern. But you get that total sum, and Keith can speak to this better than I. But you get that total sum. Sometimes they're big purchases, or all of a sudden you hear quietly that 5 or 6 independents have been bought up, and all of a sudden you're dealing with a pretty big concentration in the marketplace.
Yeah, if you want to just follow up on that, I think that makes all the sense in the world, and Ian said it very well. So when you're talking about local fisheries, food security issues, food supply, in something that's $500 million and buying something that's $100 million next week and $200 million. These are big companies in the fish processing. Maybe if you're talking about international banking or something, maybe it's not $1 billion price tag, may not be extremely big, and you can't concentrate very quickly. But I think there's different considerations here, and more we got to be looking at the security of our food supply, and I think more importantly, I feel that the security of our economy for our local people who've always depended on our fisheries resources. So I think there's some other scrutiny, and very specifically looking at that threshold, or a different way of looking at the sale of things around the fishery, is one way we can do it.
Great, thank you, Mr. Johns. We'll now go to Mr. Calkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. My first question, I guess, whoever wants to take this can. It's just a general question. I know it's been spoken to quite a bit at this, but we don't know who owns what on the West Coast, really. Is there enough transparency about who owns what on the East Coast when it comes to fisheries, when it comes to processing? Is there enough transparency about, can you find out who owns what? Does the department publish appropriately? Can you dig in and find out who's got the licenses, who's got the quota, who's got the processing, who's got what?
I'd say the short answer to that is no, we don't. And Our colleague Jim McIsaac on the West Coast can speak to very specific situations in terms of ownership being basically traced back to foreign ownership of the Canadian resource. So, and controlling that resource. So we really need to, I think, protect our food source on behalf of Canadians.
Mr. Sullivan, do you want to weigh in on it?
Yeah, I can. I'll be very quick. Yeah, and too often it's kind of cloudy. We don't know who the true owners are, and particularly when we're talking about them illegally holding, controlling agreements. So you have really no idea, and they got to dig in more on that. But just another one, and it's related to the just the sustainability of the resource. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans won't let you know how much fish was caught by offshore companies unless there's 5 there. A lot of the species that the offshore in particular are catching, there's less than 5 of them. So they call it this rule of 5, and you can't even tell how much fish is caught out of a public resource. I'm not talking about how much they caught or how much they sold it for and to who. So I mean,
we're talking inside the exclusive economic zone.
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there's some species we look, and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans can't tell you how much fish was caught out of that zone last year because there was a company got such a large share of it. So they won't make it transparent there. It's outrageous and ridiculous, but it's hid behind the cloud things continuously, and it actually don't help you manage the resource either. So another recommendation, get rid of this rule of 5 when we're talking about a public fish resource.
Okay. Sonnenberg, I see you nodding your approval. I would imagine we'll get a written response. We now know what lightning sounds like on a Zoom meeting. So it is a different sound. It's the first time I've heard this type of feedback and static. But anyway, I hope you're safe where you're at. Mr. Sullivan, it's interesting that you should say that. You know, the other night I was out fishing here on a local lake, and there was some guys that came in from shore that likely weren't going to be able to tell you how many fish they caught either, but for quite different reasons. So we'll make sure we look into this rule of 5. It's the first time I've heard of it. It's 2021. We're 2 years away from 30 years since the cod moratorium, more or less, depending on what year 92 or 93. Life cycle says 4 to 7 years for age. How come we don't have any? How come the Atlantic cod haven't recovered?
Well, in short answer, there has been a significant amount of recovery. I mean, it's gone from 10, 20,000 metric tons to over 500,000 metric tons. Many harvesters I talk to are seeing more cod now than they ever did in the 1980s. So I wouldn't say that it hasn't recovered, but it's probably been really stalled. I think in early years, the natural environment wasn't really conducive to the growth of the stock. But more and more, we're seeing a massive amount of predation, particularly by seals harvesters. See, that stock of seals has just really exploded. Other places would be called an invasion of sorts, and I mean, I think that's probably, as far as predation goes, has probably been the biggest issue in limiting the growth of that stock.
Is there anything, I don't know if you can address this, but is there anything in any of our international trade commitments or international trade agreements that would affect any of the policy proposals that we're discussing today, insofar as retaining exclusive Canadian ownership throughout the value chain of our fish stocks?
I'll just say quickly, I don't think there will be anything contrary to international trade agreements. Right now, our inshore fisheries license, the rules and regulations around that are supposed to say that you have to be, a resident of a specific area, not only Canada, for example. And to my knowledge, that hasn't been challenged at all. So I can't think of anything offhand, but I can't say that's the definitive answer.
Thank you, Mr. Calkins. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. And first, a question to Melanie. Melanie, would you explain in writing to the committee how predatory pricing practices work on the wharf to the detriment of those fisheries involved. It's important that the committee hear exactly. The price goes up for a short period of time, they get control of the market, I understand, then they drop it. So if you could submit to the committee details how this works in long term to the negative, to the negativity, the detriment of the industry, I would like to see that. My question then goes back to Mr. McPherson and to you, Melanie, as well. We received letters to this committee requesting the committee to review the pending sale or sale of Clearwater, but nobody's addressed it in this committee to date, and not in your opening comments. So what was the issue there that upset the inshore fishery so much? Could you explain, Ian and Melanie, if you can come online or speak to that issue as well?
Well, I think we know it's a historic arrangement, and our question to the minister was really quite simple. Was that with the new partnership, would there be any changes that would be outside of a share purchase? And so those are the kind of the questions that we're wondering on, and have not received responses to a number of them. We did get some responses from Minister Jordan.
Okay, could you be a bit more specific? I could understand your concern about what would happen to these licenses or quota in the event a corporation goes bankrupt, and what criteria would be in place when the licenses and access to quota is transferred to different entities. But quite frankly, I haven't heard anything specific, and that goes back to my earlier question on the corporate, because both Clearwater and Ocean Choice have access to offshore resources that the inshore fishery does not have, and they have been historically owned by corporate identities. So where are we at now? I'm not following the thread here.
I think it goes back to it was a significant deal. It involved a partner from the West Coast too, so a significant consolidation of East and West Coast companies. So there have been pretty basic questions, and I guess where our frustration has been is that, and maybe they all have simple answers, but we can't seem to get answers to some of these questions.
So could you give this committee those basic questions so that we could we will be following up with officials from the department, and that's what I want to know, what the direction I'm going to go that way, because I haven't heard it so far.
Yep, we'd be glad to do that, Mr. Morrissey. I'd be glad to do that.
Okay, because we'll need specific because if it was just a transfer and who bought them, then really that's not a road that I'm prepared to go down. We should not if it's within Canada. My concern, and I assume the fishermen would be, is in the event what controls the sale of these corporations to offshore interests. That's what I would like to focus on and be clear, is in these corporate identities, because they're granted access to, as was pointed out, a resource that's owned by the people of Canada. And my concern would focus on what steps we as a government, and I thought that's what I was going to hear from the fishing industry, what steps that we are going to take to ensure that in the sale of these corporations, not so much who is buying them, but if they go outside the country, then do we maintain that ownership here in Canada? So on that one, then I would want you in my time left to focus who wants to do, and I understand this, is the consolidation around big corporations, and they use the term the corporatization of the fishery. And what should we be as parliamentarians on the lookout from that side? Melanie, you could respond on paper, and it's fine with Ian or Kevin Solomon to respond here.
Okay, if I kind of start to take that, I think as a rule it should be strictly adhered to, that any access certainly to fishing privileges in Canada must be Canadian owned. there'd be consideration, should it be fully Canadian owned? Right now, you can basically be a foreign company and have a Canadian subsidiary and own these corporate licenses. That structure could be revisited. We know we've had major companies that have been, outwardly 49% foreign owned. Is that an acceptable threshold? Really, you wonder when you get complex structures how much of the money may be staying in Canada. We know a lot of our fishing enterprises have significant foreign investment, so I think that's something worth reconsidering as well. And maintaining our strong fishing communities. I mean, we've seen generally significant growth in the value of our enterprises on the East Coast. I mean, they are sizable businesses and they're really capable of harvesting fish. So new opportunities that exist. We're seeing a changing ecosystem. The species we're fishing and concentrating on now is not the same as it was 30, 40 years ago. I expect one thing about that, it's always going to change. The marine ecosystem is going to be conducive for some other species to come along, and giving that fish to inshore owner operators, people who live in that area coastline, that is a very good economic policy for Canada to adopt, because that is one way to ensure the value of our species stay here. Because when we see them going to offshore companies, generally following and really understanding how that money stays in our economy and even in Canada, it gets an awful lot blurrier. So leave it there.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Morrissey. That closes up our questioning for our first portion of our meeting. I want to say thank you, of course, to Ms. Sonnenberg, Mr. McPherson, and of course, Mr. Sullivan from my neck of the woods here in Newfoundland. It's great to see all of you again. I know you've been before committee before. We're going to suspend now for a moment so as we can do the change out to our next portion of our meeting. Wish everybody a safe and happy evening. Thank you. So
Thank you, Chair.
click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. I would now like to welcome to our second panel of witnesses from Clearwater Seafoods Limited Partnership. Of course, Jennifer Dulesky, Vice President, Business Development and Public Affairs, Member 2 Corporate, and of course, Christine Penny, Vice President, Sustainability and Public Affairs. You have opening statement of 5 minutes or less, and I don't know if you're both speaking or if one is doing it, but you can arrange that yourselves. And I will say to the members of the committee, when we get to questions, if you could identify who you would like to answer the question, it makes it a little bit easier and a little bit time consuming. So we'll get more information that way. So when you're ready, you're good to go. Mr. Liskey.
Thank you, Chair. It's an honor to be invited today to appear before the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. My name is Jennifer Dulesky, and I'm the Vice President, Business Development and Public Affairs at Member 2 Corporate. I'm joined by my colleague, Christine Penny, who is the Vice President, Sustainability and Public Affairs at Clearwater Seafood. We're pleased to provide comments on the committee's study examining the process and structure for corporate offshore licenses and quota transfers. We're also eager for the opportunity to address some of the concerns and issues raised in previous Fisheries and Oceans Committee sessions on the topic of inshore fishing licenses. Founded in 1976, Clearwater is one of North America's largest vertically integrated seafood companies and one of Canada's leading seafood exporters. It is recognized globally for its superior quality, food safety, diversity of species, and reliable worldwide delivery. Over the years, Clearwater has become an integral part of the community in Atlantic Canada, with a focus on responsibly harvesting seafood of the highest quality, all while investing in communities, innovation in the sector, and working towards Indigenous reconciliation. Clearwater has a long history of working collaboratively with Mi'kmaq First Nations, helping to foster meaningful participation in the commercial fishery and working towards economic outcomes that benefit everyone. There have been significant agreements over the last few years that have strengthened Clearwater's decades-long relationship with Indigenous communities. These agreements have contributed to establishing and advancing avenues for more Indigenous participation in Canada's seafood industry. Most notably, in January 2021, Premium Brands Holdings Corp. And Mi'kmaq First Nations reached a historic agreement in acquiring ownership of Clearwater Seafoods. The collective investment of 7 Mi'kmaq nations in Clearwater represents the single largest investment in the seafood industry by any Indigenous group in Canada. This is truly a generational investment that will secure and create new jobs, advance meaningful reconciliation, and will continue Clearwater's international reputation for excellence in sustainable seafood. With this partnership, Mi'kmaq are now 50% owners in the company, and it's become a new way in how we do business in this industry. Over the last few years, it's been a pleasure to work in close collaboration with Christine Penny. We are all committed to building the world's most extraordinary wild seafood company dedicated to sustainable seafood excellence. And with that, I want to hand it over to Christine.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Chair and members of the committee. I too would like to emphasize how proud we all are to have built and continue to build a relationship with the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia and Mi'kmaq in Newfoundland and Labrador. It's tangible proof of both the community and business benefits of Indigenous reconciliation and the benefits to rural fishing communities. It is truly a win-win-win. We're pleased to have new owners who are focused on creating sustainable value over the long term, which allows Clearwater to continue to invest in maintaining resources, opening markets, and building the reputation and value of Canadian seafood. Recently, there's been some questions raised regarding the ownership structure of inshore fishing licenses. I want to make it clear today that historically, under the owner-operator and fleet separation policy, and now under the current policy, DFO policy for preserving the independence of the inshore fleet in Canada's Atlantic fisheries, which has been turned into regulation, Clearwater is prohibited from owning inshore fishing licenses or entering into controlling agreements. The change in ownership of Clearwater does not impact the application of these policies and regulations or change the application of the policies and regulations to our business. Clearwater does not own and has no intention of owning licenses that fall under the PIFCAF regulations, and Clearwater does not enter into controlling agreements for licenses. Our new ownership structure puts the Mi'kmaq at the boardroom table as owners of our company, but it does not alter or impact the day-to-day operations of the company. This provides stability for 1,500 good middle-class jobs across 276 communities in Atlantic Canada that continue to help drive the economy in the region. The whole Clearwater team is excited to embark on this next chapter of the company's journey. We're proud of the partnership between Premium Brands and the Mi'kmaq and this monumental step towards reconciliation and greater Indigenous participation. We will continue to work collaboratively to build a sustainable and diverse Canadian seafood industry that supports thousands of jobs, generates significant economic activity in coastal communities, and provides seafood products of the highest quality to consumers all over the world. We look forward to your questions and thank you all for your continued leadership and commitment to fisheries excellence in Canada.
Thank you for that. And we'll get right to our round of questions. For 6 minutes or less, we'll go to Mr. Bragdon, please.
Mr. Chair, sorry, we're going to pick up with Mr. Mazur. He didn't get a chance in the first round. So, Mr. Mazur, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, witnesses, and thank you for coming out today. Does Clearwater's ownership transition change Clearwater's ability to hold and ability to hold and fish inshore licenses? So does Clearwater's ownership transition change Clearwater's ability to hold and fish inshore licenses?
No, the change in ownership doesn't affect our ability to hold inshore licenses. So we're prohibited from doing that under the what was policy and DFO and is now regulation. And that regulation continues to apply today in the same way that it did prior to the transaction.
Okay, thank you. How much of Clearwater corporate profits stay within the coastal communities?
So Clearwater is a major employer across Atlantic Canada. As I say, we have 1,500 employees. Those employees live in 276 communities across the province. We have major processing operations in small coastal communities. And we also have a significant number of our employees who are fleet employees who travel to work on offshore vessels, typically working trip on, trip off, and go back into their home communities. Of course, that generates a significant amount of economic activity, both from employment income. There's significant procurement activities that happen with small local businesses in each of those communities. And of course, Clearwater is a Canadian-owned company. So certainly heard some of the testimony earlier in terms of concern around foreign ownership. Prior to this transaction, Clearwater is a Canadian company, and it continues to be a Canadian-owned company.
I'm on mute here. Do you have a percentage of profits that stay in the communities? Do you have a plan around that?
So I don't have our economic activity broken down by community at hand here, Mr. Mazur.
Okay. It is my understanding that Clearwater was convicted of violating their Marine Stewardship Council certification. Does the Clearwater plan to renew this certification? And yes or no?
So I would clarify that we were not convicted of violating our Marine Stewardship Council certification. So we chose not to renew what is a voluntary 5-year certification with the Marine Stewardship Council. That was a business decision really based on the fact that there's a significant cost and effort to maintaining that voluntary eco-label on our products. And those products weren't actually carrying the logo into the marketplace. So we weren't getting the value of that back from the marketplace for that particular product. And so we chose at the end of our 5-year certificate not to voluntarily go into a recertification for the next 5-year period.
Do you think that not having the certification creates risk for a devalued perception of Canadian seafood products?
No, and we maintain the MSC certification on many of our other products. Of our other products, in fact. And in each case, it's really a decision that's based on the value that that eco-label brings in the marketplace. I think Canadian seafood does have a very good reputation internationally. That's on the basis of our strong regulatory regime led by DFO. And that MSC certification is really a third-party verification of the responsible management of our fisheries. So in this particular case, small volume fishery, it didn't make sense for us at the time to go into the recertification process, but I don't think that is impacting the reputation of the product internationally.
Thank you. And we've heard a lot of concern around corporate concentration and the importance of keeping the profits inside of Canada in Canadian coastal communities. How is Clearwater ensuring that the profits are staying in Canada's coastal communities? These are goals trying to get that done.
Well, I mean, what I would say is our operations generate significant economic activity in small coastal communities. In many cases, we are the major employer. Grand Bank in Newfoundland, as an example. So our plant in that community is the significant employer in the community. We've got a great working relationship with the town. We have long-standing employees who have good, solid, reliable, full-time jobs in that facility. And so beyond that, again, we are a Canadian-owned company. With this transaction, the Mi'kmaq now own 50% of the company, and that represents all aspects of the company. So from governance, operations, and economic activities, economics that are generated from the company. And so in addition to the coastal communities where we operate, the economic benefits that Clearwater generates is now flowing through to the Mi'kmaq communities as well.
Thank you, Mr. Major. We'll now go to Mr. Batiste for 6 minutes or less, please.
Yes, thank you. And I want to thank you for joining us today. And I wanted to get into some of the concerns that were raised in the previous panel. I really couldn't understand some of the concerns raised around Clearwater. I do understand it is a big deal in it, but it's also a proud deal for Cape Breton when we see leadership taking on $1 billion deals. So I wanted to come in with some of the questions around the offshore licenses. And one of the questions that I received in my correspondence, if the conversion of the offshore licenses into some other category, i.e. regulated under communal indigenous regulations, is allowed, could this in the future also be done to owner-operator licenses and enable corporations to use indigenous bands or consortiums to circumvent the owner-operator provisions of the new Fisheries Act aimed at protecting owner-operator principles?
Thank you for that question. So in this transaction, there is no change in the status of these licenses. So these are offshore commercial licenses, and they remain offshore commercial licenses. So what has changed in this transaction is the ownership of those licenses and the company.
Okay. Could this transaction circumvent PIF-CAF owner-operator policy for inshore owner-operator fishing fleets if offshore licenses are converted to communal licenses?
So again, these licenses aren't being converted, so they're not transitioning into communal commercial licenses. They are remaining offshore commercial licenses as they were prior to the transaction. So I personally don't. Well, there really is no connection to the PIF-CAF policy. Regulation, I should state, formerly policy that was around for many, many years prior to being brought into regulation. So, as I said, Clearwater was prohibited from owning inshore licenses prior to the transaction, and we remain prohibited from owning inshore licenses post this transaction.
Okay. And bear with me, because these are some of the concerns of the fisheries associations that I've received. And I just want to be on the record of being able to say that they were asked and addressed in this. And so how would the potential transfers and their developments interact with ongoing conversations around a moderate livelihood fishery? Can the end result even be predicted at this stage?
So, what I would say, the issue of the moderate livelihood is entirely separate from the Clearwater transaction and what we're discussing today, and it doesn't impact owner-operator regulations as it pertains to Clearwater.
Okay, so just to be clear, two completely different types of fisheries, and they don't interconnect in any other way besides the fact that Mi'kmaq are involved. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Canadian company, one of the things that I heard a lot in the previous panel was talking about foreign ownership, and we were doing the study to ensure foreign ownership. By definition, what does it take to make something a Canadian company? Is there a percentage, or how does that work? I'm just trying to understand.
So from a DFO policy perspective, all Canadian fishing licenses are required to be owned by a Canadian company. My understanding of that policy is that that means at least 51% Canadian ownership.
And in terms of the Mi'kmaq, are they considered Canadian, the 7 bands? Are they?
Should hope so.
They're not foreign. We're just making sure that they were actually, just making sure on the record that Mi'kmaq are considered Canadians in terms of the Canadian company by definition.
I would like to think that since this transaction, the company couldn't be any more Canadian.
Okay, but I like that answer. In terms of the premium brands holding, in terms of, do they have a percentage of Canadian level that would make sure that, it's considering that Mi'kmaq are in Canada, that would go over that 1% threshold?
Yeah, certainly. The ownership structure of premium brands was considered and looked at by DFO in this transaction. So Premium Brands is a publicly traded company. They're based in Vancouver, in British Columbia, and their shareholdings are at least 80% Canadian owned. So if you translate that, they own 50% of Clearwater. The Mi'kmaq own 50% of Clearwater. Clearwater today is at least 90% Canadian owned.
Okay, well, that's very impressive. So not foreign at all. So in previous studies, we've heard from Mi'kmaq witnesses talk about the Mi'kmaq beliefs around Nejigalimk, and now with chiefs like Terry Paul, who is leading one of the leaders in this sale. Do you feel that the responsibly harvesting seafood will continue to be part of what Clearwater is about? And do you think that with the new guiding principles within the Mi'kmaq, that helps ensuring that the sustainability of the seafood industry?
Absolutely. I don't know if many of you may have heard Chief speak before, but science always comes first, and conservation. So nothing has changed. It's the way Clearwater always operated anyway, and it's certainly the way we will plan to operate it today.
Thank you, Mr. Batiste. We'll now go to Madame Desbiens for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. I really do appreciate your statements. I would like to ask you about the resources, what's happening in the Gulf and on Quebec, on the Quebec coast. It will have an influence on resources, that is the marine resources that we have in the St. Lawrence River. I'm wondering, from your perspective, I know that there's a transaction we discussed it with the previous witnesses, but my concern comes from the fact that we're always afraid of overuse of the resource, overfishing. So what are the guarantees that your company will avoid doing that to the resource?
Thank you for the question. Sustainability is a core value at Clearwater. It always has been, and Jennifer has spoken to the Mi'kmaq perspective, and it's very inspiring to hear Chief Paul and the other chiefs speak about how you look at 7 generations as you consider any decision. And one of the really nice things about this transaction is I think it brought together three entities and groups that really share the same values around responsibility, around sustainability, and being good corporate citizens, and giving back to the communities in which we operate. And I would say Premium Brands, if you review their materials, that is what they talk about in their company as well. And so we were really pleased in this transaction that our new ownership group is focused on long-term sustainable value. Clearwater has always been focused around responsible harvesting and sustainable value of our Canadian resources. We invest a lot in science and collaborative research with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and support and collaborate with DFO in their mandate to understand the scientific basis for proper management of Canadian fisheries. And so we're very much concerned and always guarding that we are harvesting responsibly, looking at both the impact on the target species and the impact on the broader ecosystem of our operations, and making sure that those resources remain available for the long term. Of course, we operate primarily in quota and rights-based quota management systems, where individual license holders are allocated a defined share of the resource. And what that really means is it's in our interest to protect and grow the overall status of the resource and protect its long-term sustainability.
Et dites-moi, comment vous...
Question. How do you think that the department can intervene so that there won't be too much of our resource that ends up in foreign hands, and that we would have a balance between the resource, the communities? So how would you like to see the Department of Fisheries and Oceans intervene so that we don't see too much foreign investment and too much of our resource go abroad? Is this something that you think would be a good thing?
So my perspective on this is that the department has a longstanding policy around foreign ownership, and it's clearly understood and adhered to from what I see on the resource on the East Coast. So a lot of what we talked about, what was talked about in the earlier session around foreign ownership, was really on the processing plant side of things. As we know, that is a provincial jurisdiction when it comes to licensing provincial processing operations. I think a lot of the concerns raised were around what's known as controlling agreements and inappropriate circumvention of the existing rules. And there, I agree with some of my colleagues earlier. Those rules are clear and they're in place. They've been in place for many years from a policy perspective, now from a regulatory perspective, and they should be adhered to.
Et comment on peut appliquer?
Question. How can earlier, and I was asking the former witnesses, how could we set up a type of surveillance committee or some kind of entity that would be able to defend the values? So how could we be able to help the department to really have a proper balance between the transparency and the economy? So you could yourself be on this, given a vigilance committee that would that a surveillance committee, would that help?
What I can speak to is the process that we went through in this transaction. So there was extensive due diligence done by the department around the Canadian ownership provisions, and extensive information provided to the department with respect to the new owners. And I would expect that process is taking place in any transaction that is coming before the department. So I think the system is working, frankly, from the perspective of DFO taking the steps that they need to take to ensure the Canadian ownership provisions are adhered to and respected. I certainly have a good sense of the industry on the East Coast from an offshore perspective, and I don't see any companies or licenses that would violate that requirement here on the East Coast, to my knowledge. Not as familiar with the situation on the West Coast, but I would expect the DFO has been doing that due diligence process for any transactions.
Thank you, Madame Desbiens. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 6 minutes or less, please, to clue up.
Well, thank you to both witnesses for your important testimony. Can you speak maybe, it's my understanding that the Mi'kmaq have made a significant investment that's going to take many years before they even see a nickel of profit. That shows to me that they're dedicated, a long-term commitment to this company and to the resource. Can you maybe speak about how this plays into sustainability and also to conservation for the company in the region?
Well, I think we looked at this investment as a long-term investment, and one that was going to see wealth generation for future generations, and like Christine mentioned, the 7 generations. And I think that does show that we look to things in a sustainable way. We knew it made sense. We knew that this deal would bring not only profits back to the communities, at which time we saw fit to take the profits back, but also to generate employment opportunities, and just being able to get into this business, not just from the deckhand, but everything from, you probably heard some of the chief's comments from the CEO level down to the deckhand. So this is we are fully integrated within Clearwater. And I guess, that's the win-win that came out of this transaction, was that it's, it is an investment, and it's one that we looked at it from a long-term game plan, but it's given us benefits right from day one.
That's great. Royal Greenland, we heard about them, $52 million in profits, money leaving our country. And here you have a company where you're generating profit that's going to stay in the hands of local shareholders and the local community. Can you speak, and maybe you can only speak on your own perspective, but can you speak about how important this is for reconciliation in terms of, Indigenous participation in the resource, and in terms of self-determination?
So I guess I would say that for the Mi'kmaq and the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, that this was, our first access to the offshore, which was a pretty monumental step. We've been working closely with Clearwater for some time. They get reconciliation. They understand what it means, and we saw that early on. So it was we spent a lot of time getting to know each other, and we've done other agreements in the past that have seen benefits to the communities, and we trust each other, and they see us more as equals and as a partner in the community, and now owners. So I can't define any reconciliation in any other way other than, we now own 50% of Clearwater, and that's a big deal.
Did you want to add anything, Ms. Penny?
I mean, it's been an honor for me to participate in this process. As Jennifer said, we've worked together on a variety of deals before this. Clearwater announced that it was putting itself up for sale in March of 2020, and the Mi'kmaq were at the table from the beginning. And it's just been an honor to participate in frankly, such a historic event for Canadian fisheries and see the Mi'kmaq take their place at the table, both at our boardroom table and at the industry table from an offshore perspective. And I think that is going to be a huge positive step for the entire industry going forward.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, there has been some concerns, as you're aware, of the sale. Can you, just in my last 2 minutes, you can use this time to talk about any issues that maybe haven't come up that you haven't addressed around removing those concerns? Please feel free to anything that may have been missed. Ms. Penny, do you want to lead off on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I would just go back to the earlier statements. It's been a bit puzzling for me personally as to where the concerns were coming from. When I hear that perhaps there was a misperception that these were being converted to commercial communal licenses, I can see where maybe that would have raised some questions. Again, don't see this as something that should be creating concern for the rest of the industry. The industry at large has understood that there's been an appetite for further participation by Indigenous groups in the fishery, and has been looking for ways to partner and to work with the Indigenous community to build relationships on a business level. And I think that this transaction has created a model for economic reconciliation in Canada that will serve the fishing industry, but goes beyond that to other industries as well. This is a transaction where, as I say, the Mi'kmaq participate equally in every aspect of the company, from governance to operations to the financial benefits that are generated from the company to the employment benefits that Jennifer spoke to. And, we've certainly been able to provide reassurance to our employees that no one's going to lose their job as a result of this transaction, but we will be redoubling and refocusing our efforts on our diversity commitments and making sure that we are providing opportunities for Mi'kmaq individuals at every level of the company. And we've just recently hired an Indigenous employment officer that will lead that effort across the company. So she will be working with the individual communities, with Mi'kmaq individuals, to make sure that job opportunities are well advertised and well known, that we're looking at training and recruitment gaps, and ensuring that Clearwater continues to grow and continues to be a visibly Indigenous owned company.
Thank you, Mr. Jans. That kind of closes up this portion of our meeting today. I want to say thank you to Ms. Penny and Ms. Deleski for coming to committee today and giving your valued testimony. And a big thank you, I guess, to Clearwater and helping create local economies and help small communities survive that much better. I want to tell everyone that we don't have time to go any further with anything. All the party whips are in agreement that we end now. And I'll say thank you to the analysts, to the clerks, to the translators, and everybody for participating. Special thank you to Madame Desbiens for being here today. And we'll see everybody on Wednesday. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
À la prochaine. Au revoir.